Good morning. I always feel like I have to sing to you guys because we're singers. It's what we do. Welcome to Body Talk Tuesday. I am Sarah Whitten, and I run Sarah Whitten Voice Yoga Movement. I am a yoga teacher turned movement educator. And I call myself that because yoga became insufficient for my body. Hey, Jen Carter. You are an anniversary follower. I don't even know what that means, but congratulations, it's our anniversary. I'm not sure what that means. And Rebecca Weaver is here. We're Rebecca Weaver Ham now. You were Weaver in graduate school. I'm Sarah Whitten. I run Sarah Whitten Voice, Yoga, and Movement. And I call myself a movement educator because yoga felt insufficient, because yoga became insufficient for my body. And I needed to learn a whole lot more to really adequately have a body that functions. So I have incorporated much more than just yoga into what I do with people's bodies, though I consider how I am in the world and how I work with people to be yoga. And that's sort of my own personal thing that I do. And today, what I wanted to talk with you about is this topic of body after baby. And by body, I mean belly, I mean low back, I mean pelvic floor, I mean your voice, all of it. So it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I have two children who will in a month turn 10 and 7. And I still consider myself to be postpartum. You are postpartum from the moment those children exit you until you die, I guess. That never ends. Your body is always changing. And I want to kind of get into that stuff. I am going to see if I can share this. I don't know how to do any of this stuff. I wanted to try and share it into my, into the Seeing the Whole Singer group so that more people could find it. So give me a second to see if I can make that happen. And if I can't, I'm not going to spend time on it because I want to talk with you guys. So I know most of you so far that I've seen on here, and I know that you are mothers. But even if you're not a mother, you are, let's see, maybe I can do this. There's a delay here. So far that I've seen on here, and I know that you are share to a group. Here is Sarah's. Oh, good, I'm doing it. We'll see if that works. Okay. Now back to our regular scheduled program here. Hopefully that's sharing, and if not, I'll share it afterwards. Most of you are mothers, but this applies to you if you're going to just work with someone who's had a baby. And many of you, because I know you who are watching right now, are very highly trained, and the impacts to your voice may be different than the very avocational singer that you are going to see in your studio. The way that I tend to talk about the things that happen in our bodies is that they can either be subtle or they can be seismic. And I have yet to meet a woman who has had a child who hasn't experienced that as a seismic change, both to their bodies, but also just to your life, right? It's a massive shift to go from not having a child to having a child. It's an even bigger shift, I found, to go from having one to having another. I think once you're at the 2, life is already sort of chaotic, but to go to 3, some people have told me, suddenly you're outnumbered, even if your spouse or partner is around. So let's get into this. I really consider the work that I do as work that is bringing people home to their body again, because that's what this work was for me, was rediscovering and reconnecting to my body in a new way. And I see that happen all the time with the people that I work with, and it sort of manifests in different ways for them. But I like to think of it as this work is about coming home to your body again and again and again and again. Now, I've already mentioned a little bit the distinction between an avocational singer and a professional singer. Immediately postpartum, some women experience a change in their voice, that there's a breathiness, there's a huskiness, and there can be that kind of, I don't even know if it would qualify as fry, but there's kind of a cragginess to the voice that can happen, which to us, we'd probably consider it fry. And a lot of that happens because of changes to the pelvic floor. And those changes happen as a result of childbirth. That I did a whole training with this wonderful physical therapist named Julie Wiebe, or Wiebe, I'm not sure how you say her last name. And she teamed up with another physical therapist, and they did this whole sort of throat pelvic floor connection training that I took. And they talk about, even in the delivery room, and some of you may have experienced this too. I know the midwives commented to me that as you're vocalizing when you're in labor, that the higher sounds are associated with more sort of tension and pain, and the lower sounds are more associated with sort of a little more ease in things. So a hypo, meaning less tension in the pelvic floor can be lacking tension postpartum, can result in that airy voice that happens, or the craggly voice. And what happens, what we know, is that the vocal folds can stiffen when they're not used well. And so that change in the voice can be heard. So one of the things sometimes that women's health physical therapists are doing are listening to the voice to assess those changes. And you, as a voice teacher, if you have someone coming to you who has a new baby, you might also hear some of those things in their voice. And you're not going to offer them pelvic floor work, but you might say, hey, you could do to get an assessment from a pelvic floor women's health physical therapist to see what's going on there. Some of that might resolve just as your body comes through the transition of having the baby. I remember going for my 6-week checkup after having my first, and I left there thinking, pardon my French, but this is bullshit. Like, what's supposed to be better after only 6 weeks? Like, okay, I'm cleared to go and do everything, but nothing is like what I healed or changed in the way that I thought that it would be. So I don't know that in 6 weeks that would have shifted, but if it hasn't in that time, or it hasn't after 12 weeks or whatever, you might want to say to someone who's singing with you, hey, you might want to go and get a women's health physical therapist to check you out. It can be, if there this would be other indications that you would want to refer them on, is if they're having sort of trouble with just laughing and talking, more of that airy voice type of thing. The chords just aren't approximating, and it's happening because they've lost the sort of bottom part of the pump that is connected into this system. So as a more trained singer, that might still happen. I had the experience, and a lot of other singers have as well, that when they've had a vaginal delivery, the baby can come fast because you've got a good connection to those low muscles. And I remember the midwives telling me, prepare for several hours of pushing. And my first was there in 4 pushes, and everyone was totally unprepared. No one was gloved up, and they were literally trying to catch her so that she did not fall on the floor. And I've heard so many singers have that same experience. So that's some stuff about the avocational versus professional voice, things you might see happen. But in general, I would say that the most common postpartum things that we tend to experience in our bodies would include low back pain, sneeze pee, increased upper body tension, and what we call diastasis recti. And that is in your front, the very top layer of abdominal muscles, your rectus abdominis. So these are my rectus abdominis muscles on either side. The midline is connected by something called the linea alba. And as you get pregnant and the muscles are pulled apart by the increased load of the baby in the front, that linea alba stretches. So a diastasis at about 36 weeks pregnancy is considered completely normal. Almost everyone, if not everyone, is deemed to have one. So it's not a problem that you have one when you're pregnant. And for many people, it will resolve shortly after pregnancy. Again, the timeline for everyone's healing is going to be different. Everybody's body is different. So I had one at 36 weeks with my first, and then it went away on its own. And I did not have one after that. So the issue with the diastasis comes up when it doesn't resolve on its own. And with my second, it did not resolve. I had a 3-finger. So a diastasis is measured by how wide across it was. So between my rectus abdominis halves, you could fit 3 fingers. So that width is one element of it, and then depth is another. So they'll stick their finger into it, and you can either go up 1 knuckle, 2, or maybe sink all the way in. And that tells you a lot about the sort of texture of that tissue. And of course, you can have things like a hiatal hernia where there's actually a little bit of so much weakness in the tissue that your intestines can come through that. I have a whole video that if people are interested, let me know in the comments about how to test for a diastasis. So if you're not sure if you have one, it's a very easy thing to figure out. But position matters, because in some positions you may have one and in some positions you may not. And really what matters is how well your body compensates for that diastasis. And there is work that can be done to make it smaller. And I come from the place, and the way that I was trained is that as long as you are alive, tissue can change. So if you're 10 years postpartum, 20 years postpartum, you probably can still affect a change on your diastasis. Obviously, as we age, how collagen functions in our body changes, and collagen is a major factor in that diastasis. If you have something like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, where collagen in your body really works differently, that will be impacted as well. So the diastasis itself isn't usually the problem. It's a symptom of a bigger problem. And the bigger problem with diastasis is what's called intra-abdominal pressure. So the pressure inside your abdomen. So when you have the load of a baby in there, the pressure gets greater, and that's what causes it to separate. What I have seen in so many singers, particularly the highly trained singers, is that they have a habit of really creating excess intra-abdominal pressure in the belly from the way that they're breathing to produce the sound. And I've mentioned this in other lives and other videos. When you have that repeated kind of low belly breath, there is a stiffening of your thoracic spine and rib cage that happens. So it's a little bit, it can be a tricky thing to solve, because it's really hard to find the mobility that you want in your rib cage when you've got this belly dominant breath. But to resolve the belly dominant breath, you need better mobility in your rib cage. So you've got to work on that all at once. So that intra-abdominal pressure is what's sort of creating the problem. That's what's creating the sneeze pee effect. And you can easily lie on the floor, put your hands below your belly button and cough, and see if the belly pops up into your hand when you cough. And that tells you that you've got a habit of some resting tension there. And when your abdomen is bulging on that cough, that also means very likely that your speaking and singing isn't as efficient as it could be if we can begin to resolve that pattern. So it's sort of like, this is where we begin to get the connection between the throat, the actual diaphragm, and the pelvic floor, which are sort of moving like a sump pump. I don't know, they have sump pumps in New England. We have one in our basement. I don't know if they have them elsewhere in the country, but that kind of sump pump action where it's going to suck things back up as the diaphragm returns to its resting position. The pelvic floor should be going with it as well. Okay, so let's talk about voice changes. Those are some of the physical changes to the body, and let's talk about some of the voice changes that can be happening. I just want to check and see if I'm missing any comments. I don't think I am so far. The voice changes that happen can be hormonal. Often there is a change, as I mentioned, right after, where that's a physical change where the airiness, breathiness, because the bottom part of the pump isn't working the way that it normally works. But then you can have a hormonal shift, because Lord knows your hormones are kind of going nuts as you're transitioning out of being pregnant and potentially into breastfeeding if you're doing that, or just returning to your regular body if you're using formula with your baby. So I'm trying to think about some of the other, so there may be a change, another sort of physical change if the pelvic floor isn't able to sort of engage and release the way that we want it to. We can hear that. As I mentioned before, that would be one of the referral points. So hormonal changes, you might find that parts of your range are different. There's, I think, again, this is totally anecdotal, but most of the singers that I've worked with and I've experienced that there's a change in the quality of the voice postpartum, that there's often richness that comes with the sound that has changed. And then, of course, I mean, we're always evolving because our hormones are always shifting. So once you're even in your 30s, your hormones are starting to change. And then as you get closer and closer to menopause, they're going to change more. Some people experience reflux in their pregnancy and potentially postpartum when they're nursing as well. And that can be new. That was something that happened to me. And I had no range above an E5. I could go from, a little bit below middle C to that E5, and then my voice cut out. And that began when I was pregnant with my first, and it continued all the way through the almost full year that I nursed her. And with my second, I had none of that. So I think it's very pregnancy dependent. And some of the physical changes that I think singers notice can be those hormonal and reflux, but I think those are the more subtle changes that happen. The seismic changes often come from the physical shifts that have happened in the body, that suddenly the underlying foundation for the voice that's created by the abdominal area and the pelvic girdle and your torso in general has just changed so much. And there's work that we need to do to kind of recoup that and get it back. So what I want to convey is that you can get it back. It can change because now not only did you have all that, but you've got this baby who might only be 8 pounds, 6 pounds. My first was 6, my second was 8. Some people have 10-pound babies. But you're carrying them and you may be nursing them. And so your upper body is suddenly doing work. I mean, how often do you walk around holding an 8-pound weight for like 14 hours a day? Or God forbid they're doing some kind of cluster feeding and you're holding them for 22 out of 24 hours of the day. So your upper body begins to feel the impact of that carry and of the positioning that you might be in. And so we get even more of that hyperkephosis going on in the upper body. So all of those things can impact your voice. And we're going to get into a lot of this. The core challenge that's coming up that I'm going to run at the end of the month is not specifically for postpartum bodies, but in a way it is, because I always say everything I needed to learn about the voice I learned from my pelvic floor, because it was through that rehab work for myself that suddenly so many light bulbs went off of the things that people had been kind of talking around, I think because they don't know how to have a conversation about a part of the body that is as sensitive a topic as the pelvic floor, but also just that connection from sort of stem to stern, if you will, of the throat all the way down to the pelvic floor, and the tissues that span that distance, basically from one end of your spine to the other, are incredibly impactful on the voice. So this upcoming challenge will be suitable for anyone, whether they are postpartum or not, because some of the things that I've talked about, like a diastasis, you don't have to have had a baby to have a diastasis. There are men who have diastasis in their bodies. There are lots of things that can cause it. If you have just breathing patterns can cause it. Tension in the upper body, so then you're a belly breather, can cause it. Abdominal visceral fat can cause you to have that intra-abdominal pressure that creates it. So you don't have to have had a baby to have a lot of these experiences in your body. So I would love to know if anyone has questions. Feel free to post them. But there's a lot to dive into when it comes to your body and your voice after baby. And I think it's really important for us as voice teachers and voice professionals to know, as with everything, what can we deal with in the studio and what do we need to refer out for. And if you don't have knowledge of in your area, a good women's health physical therapist for a singer, or whether they're pro or avocational, to refer them to, you might want to look that up. I think if you just Google women's health physical therapist, I think there's an index that you can search to find someone in your area who's good. Even on, let's say you have a teen girl. I got a request this summer from a teacher who has a teen girl who has a lot painful periods, and she is someone who needs, as a 17-year-old, to go and see a women's health physical therapist. So she's not had babies yet, and she's not planning to anytime in her life, but she needs that person as well. So they're a great person to have in your resource file of people nearby to help out your female singers. So I hope you will consider joining me for the challenge. I should have the landing page done soon, like today or tomorrow, and you'll be able to sign up, and it will be an email every day with some moves. I'll be going live in the Seeing the Whole Singer group to talk more about this kind of stuff and answer questions. And yeah, so Let me know what questions you have. Thank you for joining me. This has been a little longer than I maybe thought it was going to be, but I always have a lot to say about life after babies because it's big and it's important, and there's not enough out there for women, particularly for women singers, I think, to help us through this time. So thank you for joining me. I will see you all later. Take care.